How's everybody doing today? I thought I'd move off my couch to a different place. I'm wearing different clothes today, different hat. Look, same glasses though. I need to switch it up later. How's everybody doing? I hope you're finding stuff to do in addition to some schoolwork. I do think it's important to do the schoolwork because we don't want to end up coming back just with our brains like a big pile of mush. So do some of this stuff. But I also encourage you to do some creative stuff while you're stuck at home. Um, Most things I've read told me it's okay to go outside. It's a weird thing to say, but it is. So go get some exercise, go for a walk, do that kind of stuff if you're not already. Anyway, you didn't come here for advice about how to live your life. So let's talk about the quiz I posted yesterday after I take a drink of my tea. Thank you to the 12 people who came in and took the quiz. Once this video posts, I'm going to take that quiz down because again, the point of this was to keep you on track to get the reading done. And it's extra credit, so you got to do it while it's up. But I'll probably put this to post around noon-ish today, and then the 1940 quiz is up. I'll do the same thing tomorrow. At some point tomorrow afternoon, I'll post a video like this, just going through the quiz and talking about chapter and answering any questions that came up. So here we go. I just wanted to talk through the quiz. Which of the following is not a reason that the townspeople think Sula is evil? I hope everybody most people did get this one right, but it was that they thought she killed Plum. Nobody mentions thinking that she killed Plum, but the chapter starts with them talking about, let me go to the beginning of the chapter, right there. When word got out about Eva being put in Sunnydale, the people on the bottom shook their heads and said Sula was a roach. So we know that's one of the reasons. Down at the bottom of that same page, they said that Sula slept with white men. It may not have been true, but it certainly could have been. She was obviously capable of it. In any case, all their minds were closed to her when that word was passed around. So that, again, too, is one of the reasons I think she's evil. And then on page 114, starts at the bottom, page 113, page 114, there's a story about how this boy came to her house and he just tripped by himself. And she went to help him, actually. But they blamed her for it. One thing I want you to think about here. So, yes, she does put Eva in Sunnydale, and that's not so great. Then again, Eva's pretty crazy, and she killed her own children. So, I don't know. Does Eva get anything more than what she was maybe deserving? It's debatable. The other two things here, though, what I want to point out to you, and a lot of the things that come up are reasons why people think she is evil, are lies. They're not true. So a lot of what we come to hear about Sula ends up being made up. So if you read this chapter and you start to think, man, Sula is the worst, stop and ask yourself if it's because of the things she's actually done, or if you've also started to believe the rumors that are being spread around the bottom as you read this chapter. Because the vast majority of the reasons that they share are not things she actually did or is responsible for. To think about that, I think Morrison's asking us to think about that too. How does Shadrach respond when he sees Sula on the street? He crosses right over to her and he tips an imaginary hat toward her. Like that. We get that on page 116. We got two people telling stories to each other, and this is one of the stories that one woman tells to another one, is that she saw this happen. And I think it's another reason people start to think, again, it's just sort of like this list of reasons why people don't trust Sula, and it's because they don't really, I was going to say they don't trust Shadrach. I don't know if they don't trust Shadrach, but to them, Shadrach represents like chaos and stuff, because he's usually around like cursing at people and yelling. So for him to cross the street and like tip his hat in this very formal way is very out of character for Shadrach in their minds. So they're wondering like, oh, that can't be a good sign. Like Shadrach's the dude who runs around and like yells at people and is drunk all the time, and he's acting like this with her. That's not a good sign. So that's how they're taking that. If you also think about what Sula thought about Shadrach when she saw his shack back after Chicken Little died too, it's interesting to think about that too, in terms of how people perceive Shadrach to be and how he might actually be. And she has maybe seen that more private side of Shadrach in ways that others haven't, even if it just meant she went to her house, because I doubt anybody else in the bottom has actually ever been to Shadrach's house, to be honest. So more stuff to think about. What was the one lie Sula told in her life? I was actually surprised that everybody didn't get this one right, because it says very clearly on the bottom of page 121. She had lied only once in her life to Nell about the reason for putting Eva out, and she could lie to her only because she cared about her. Which does make you wonder. I mean, one of the interesting things about this book that I like is I'm always curious about what Morrison decides to leave out. So she like says things like that, but she doesn't tell us what the real reason for putting Eva out was necessarily. We're left to wonder what that is. But now we know it's not because she was afraid of her, because that's the reason that she gave Sula back in the 1937 chapter. Everything else there, she just doesn't say those things. So, or they're not lies. And then another one that should have been a relatively simple one to get with textual evidence is on page 127, when it says, what is it about Ajax that really makes Sula fall for him? On the bottom, page 127. But it was not the presents that made her wrap him up in her thighs. They were charming, of course, especially the jar of butterflies he let loose in the bedroom. What a great image there, like in that sense. I love the way Morrison just like drops little images here and there in the book. But her real pleasure was the fact that he talked to her. They had genuine conversation. He did not speak down to her, next page, or at her, nor content himself with puerile questions about her life or monologues of his own activities. Thinking she was possibly brilliant like his mother, he seemed to expect brilliance from her, and she delivered. So in the end, it's the way that they have this sort of like mutual respect for one another through conversation. That doesn't mean she doesn't like those other things about him. I think these are actually all things that she kind of likes about him. But the thing that she likes most is the conversations that they have. I'm going to quickly look at people's questions that you left over here and talk about some if I can. So on page one, let's look at page 122, last sentence. I'll go there. We'll look at it. Page 122, last sentence of the first paragraph. They had looked at the world and back at their children, back at the world and back again at their children, and Sula knew that one clear young eye was all that kept the knife away from the throat's curve. Let's read this whole paragraph actually for a second and talk about that last line then. So I'm gonna read the whole thing. We already read the first part of this, but I'll go through the whole thing. She had lied only once in her life to Nell about the reason for putting Eva out, and she could lie to her only because she cared about her. When she had come back home, social conversation was impossible for her because she could not lie. She could not say to those old acquaintances, "Hey girl, you looking good," when she saw how the years had dusted their bronze with ash. The eyes that had once opened wide to the moon bent into grimy sickles of concern. The narrower their lives, the wider their hips. Those with husbands had folded themselves into starched coffins, their sides bursting with other people's skinned dreams and bony regrets. Those without men were like sour-tipped needles featuring one constant empty eye. Those with men had had the sweetness sucked from their breath by ovens and steam kettles. Their children were like distant but exposed wounds whose aches were no less intimate because separate from their flesh. I want to read that sentence again. Their children were like distant but exposed wounds whose aches were no less intimate because separate from their flesh. They had looked at the world and back at their children, back at the world and back again at their children. And Sula knew that one clear young eye was all that kept the knife away from the throat's curve. So, a couple ways to read that. I think that line that I reread there, because I needed to understand it for myself for a second. Their children were like distant but exposed wounds whose aches were no less intimate because separate from their flesh. As a parent, I can definitely I think I understand that line maybe a slightly different way, in that like when you have kids, they feel like extensions of you, and like like super sensitive extensions of you. Like when they hurt, you hurt. When like I was watching my son as we were walking through the park yesterday, and he like jumped up on the ledge over the bridge by Humboldt Park, and like I like was like because I get so worried he's gonna fall, like more worried than I would be about myself. So I think that's what she's talking about there. But that last line, I think there's a couple of different interpretations here, honestly. So one is that they really deep down inside want to kill their children, or at least they don't really want to be parents, don't want the bother of it. But it's just like there's some little thing in their children that keeps them from doing that. Other interpretation, it is their children, especially for the women, especially for the wives who have children. I think Sula is suggesting that the only thing they have left in their lives is their children. So that's the only thing that actually keeps them from killing themselves, is looking at their children and seeing them in that way. And to me, that kind of the second interpretation, I think, makes more sense, only because of the way that later in this chapter, Morrison writes about the feeling that Nell develops for her children after Jude leaves. And it's like this all encompassing feeling, because like that's, again, all she had left at that moment was like her love for her children. It's maybe the one thing that keeps her from going crazy. So I feel like just based on other things in this chapter, I think the reading for that line probably is that the one thing that keeps these women from ending their own lives is their children. And, this is a good chance to think back to like the to be or not to be speech. Like, who would bear the fartles and blah, 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 blah. Except for I think here, instead of like Hamlet suggesting that it's because we don't know what comes after death, Sula here is suggesting that it is that they live for their children. Anyway, why would Sula have affairs with other men if she was only looking forward to sorrow? I don't. I think one thing that we get by the end of this chapter, when especially through that conversation that Sula has with Nell, is that Sula just does whatever she feels like doing. In the end, she doesn't care about how it's going to make other people feel. I think she hopes it will make her feel something. But I think she just goes from experience to experience, simply trying to have those experiences. And I think she probably views men the same way. It's just like an opportunity to have an experience that she otherwise would not have. And I think she looks at that as the way to live life, is just to grab every experience you can grab and take full advantage of it. So what it leads to, I think if it's sorrow, it's sorrow, but I think that's how we're to understand that Sula decides to live her life. Why did Ajax fall out of love for Sula? So a couple of things about Ajax Sula. I think that would suggest that Ajax, that they were in love with each other. And I don't know that they were. I can't remember. Like Ajax is just an older, smooth talking dude who I think the reason that he and Sula connect so much is that I think he has a similar take on life. Like he's just going from thing to thing, living his life the way he's going to live it. I think he's probably more interested in airplanes than he is in Sula, maybe. I think he sees his mother in Sula, and that's part of what attracts her to him, or him to her. And also, I just think it's like, in the end, and I think I talked about this briefly, at least I can't remember which class I talked about, first or second period or both, but are there any men in this book who don't eventually leave their partner in some way? And the answer to that question is no. So to me, the bigger question is, what is Morrison trying to say through the fact that every man leaves every woman at some point here? And the last question, of all the people she has slept with, did Sula actually love Ajax? No. I know that because page 131. Or at least she doesn't think she does. I mean, does she really? Who knows? But if you look at page 131, halfway down the page after those little 3 dots in the middle, again, page 131, a little more than halfway down, 3 dots. Sula began to discover what possession was. Not love, perhaps, but possession, or at least the desire for it. She was astounded by so new and alien a feeling. First, there was the morning of the night before when she actually wondered if Ajax would come by that day. Then there was an afternoon when she stood there before the mirror, finger tracing the laugh lines around her mouth and trying to decide whether she was good looking or not. She ended this deep perusal by tying a green ribbon in her hair. The green silk made a rippling whisper as she slid it into her hair, a whisper that could easily have been Hannah's chuckle, a soft, slow, nasal hiss she used to emit when something amused her, like women sitting for 2 hours under the Marcelline irons, only to wonder 2 days later how soon they would need another appointment. The ribbon tying was followed by other activity. When Ajax came that evening, bringing her a reed whistle he had carved that morning, not only was the green ribbon still in her hair, but the bathroom was gleaming, the bed was made, and the table was set for two. So I think the big thing here is, yeah, that sounds like she's fallen in love with Ajax. But the thing that she understands is she wants Ajax, like she wants him to be hers, and I think she wants Ajax to want her to be his. And so maybe that's what love is. I think Sula by the end of the chapter would say that's not love. I think she would say that's what Nell felt for Jude, which she kind of just goes about. And I don't know that she even likes the way she's feeling that way. She just is feeling that way. So, does she love him? I don't know. I think Sula as a character would have a different interpretation of what love really is than either you or I. I do think that potentially the one person Sula has ever loved, I would argue, is Nell. I'm going to leave you with that thought. This video was longer than I thought it would be, but still, if you're having trouble with the book, I hope that's helpful. Feel free to leave comments. Feel free to send me your own videos, any of that stuff. I'll throw some extra credit your way or do something during this time. Let's all have A pluses when we come back. Why not? Seriously, you could if you wanted to. So I'll leave it there. If you got any questions, let me know. Leave them in the comments with this or send me an email. Hope you're doing well. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being awesome, guys.